Now, a Free Market News ETV special presentation.
Hi, thank you very much for turning on the website. I'm John St. George, along with G. Edward Griffin, the author of Creature from Jekyll Island. And also the website on your screen is where you can get all the information you want about some of the interesting subjects he covers. And one subject we have right now is the subject of freemarketnews.com, the free market idea in general. It's starting to pick up momentum, and once that picks up momentum, look out. There are troubles, and there could be troubles down the road. Ed, what do you think the free market thinker is going to go up against?
Opposition, in a word, of course. And that's pretty easy to figure out when you realize that in any business, if someone senses opposition or competition, they'll do their best to beat out the competition. In the classic free market environment, you beat out your competition by providing a better service or a better product at a lower price. But in the old style of competition, and by that I mean not free market, but the monopoly style, you beat out your competition by political influence, to pass laws, to give yourself an advantage over your component, or you use dirty tricks, or whatever you have to do to beat out your competition. So there are different tactics that you can expect depending on the sector from which the attack is coming. Unfortunately, the area of free market news and our organization, Freedom Force International, we're dealing with themes and issues that are global in nature and have tremendous impact upon the way the country will move politically and economically. And so we're not just dealing with maybe one competitor who sees us dominating a market that he might want. We're looking at a group of people globally who don't like what we're saying or what we're trying to do because it would challenge their political and their social and their economic power over society. Now we're dealing with a whole different animal here. In fact, we're dealing with a very large and dangerous animal. Who are these people? Well, as you know, we describe them in our organization as collectivists. These are the ones who believe in big government as the solution to all problems, especially with themselves in control, because that gives them the heady wine of being able to direct society, supposedly for the best interest of society. But along the way, they do pretty well too, and you know who I'm talking about. These are the wealthiest people in the world. They're the ones who have their hands on the levers of power in government and in banking and in education and in media. In our country, you find the cluster of these individuals in a single organization, believe it or not. Most of them are there. Not all of them, but most of them are in an organization called the Council on Foreign Relations. Now, this is an organization that goes back, has its history, goes way back. It's the outgrowth of a secret society that was created by Cecil Rhodes. Everybody's heard of Rhodes, one of the most wealthy Britishers of all time. He was the head commissioner, or I've forgotten exactly the name of the title, but he was the top political figure in South Africa. He owned all of the diamond mines and the gold mines there, and was one of the wealthiest men in the world at that time. He was a collectivist. He had a burning passion to change the world, to create a new world order, as it was called, based on the model of collectivism. And he followed the Fabian model, which was opposite to the Leninist model. The Leninist model was to bring about revolution by force and violence, blood in the streets, overthrow governments, and establish the dictatorship of the proletariat and so forth. That was their way of bringing collectivism to power. The Fabians said, no, let's do it slowly. Let's do it incrementally so nobody really gets too alarmed. We'll move into the power centers of society. We'll put our people into education, into government positions quietly. We won't speak about revolution. We won't even speak about socialism. We'll talk about reform and welfare and helping people. And this way, they said, we will bring collectivism to power in all of the Western countries of the world through legislation, not through revolution, but through legislation. And it's interesting because they said when it happens, they said the old constitutions will still look like they're standing, but they said it would be a shell. Inside the shell, it'll be hollow. The old system will be gone, and it will be replaced by our collectivism. So, Cecil Rhodes was a firm he was a firm believer in collectivism, and he wanted to see that system established globally. And when he died, he left almost all of his fantastic fortune to the purpose of building collectivism worldwide. And he did this through a series of wills. And everybody's heard of the Rhodes Scholarship, for example. That was established in one of his wills. And that was the only really visible part of this plan, was to create a fund, an endowment fund, to find the brightest men they could find in the world, or at least in the Western world, whose minds were open to the idea of collectivism, and to make sure that they got the finest education and were moved up the ladder of success into positions of political influence in England and in Australia and the United States and so forth. But there were other wills which established other aspects of this plan. And one of them was a secret society. And the reason we know about this, since it's a secret society, you might ask, well, how do you know? It couldn't have been very secret.
Right.
It was very secret for years until a professor, Carroll Quigley, wrote a book. Now, Professor Quigley was an instructor at Georgetown University. He was the one that was President Clinton's teacher. In fact, when Clinton was inaugurated to office, you may remember, in his inaugural address, he gave honorable mention to his mentor, Professor Carroll Quigley. Clinton studied at the feet and worshipped at the feet of Quigley. Now, Quigley was a brilliant historian, and he wrote a couple of books. One of them was called Tragedy and Hope, which is a big, thick book. You think my books are thick. You should read this guy's books, you know. And it was the history of the world in our time, and he was quite a historian. And he spoke from an inside point of view. He said in this book, he said, there is a secret society. And I know about it because I'm privy to its private papers. He said, I like these guys. He said, I admire what they're trying to do. He was kind of the in-house historian. He was a collectivist, too. And he wrote this book more or less as a historical record for the insiders, so that everybody in the club could get the history and see how wonderful this secret society was and what they had accomplished over the years. And so he documented this. It really wasn't meant for public consumption. And it wasn't until copies began to fall into the hands of people like myself who were reading and say, wow, this guy is blowing the whistle on some very important stuff. Then when the word began to get out in other channels, of course the publisher, which was Macmillan, pulled the book and said it's no longer available and so forth. Well, bootleg copies started to circulate and so forth. So there are plenty of copies out there. You can see what he wrote. But in this book, Quigley lays out the fact that most of the money that came from Cecil Rhodes went into the establishment of a classic secret society, and by that I mean classic, I mean there was a center group, and he named who the people were who ran the secret society, and then they had an outer ring, as they call it, of associates who were brought in, and they knew only one of the people in the center, but not all of them. And then the outer ring had another ring of influence, and those people thought they were the center of the group, not realizing there were centers within centers and so forth. That's the classic structure. And he describes how this secret society created the Royal Institute of International Affairs in London as an outer ring to carry out the mission of Cecil Rhodes, to collectivize the world and move their members into all the power centers of society. And then he described how in the United States the branch was the Council on Foreign Relations, and that there are similar branches in Australia and other places in the world, in Canada and so forth. But that's where we find out the origins of the Council on Foreign Relations is because of Quigley, who was privy to all these private papers revealing it. So now you jump over the ocean and you realize that the Council on Foreign Relations, when it appeared in the United States, was sponsored by people such as J.P. Morgan. And all of a sudden you've got all the big banking interests and financial interests in the United States, the Rockefellers and so forth, as part of this nexus. They're providing the funding, and all of a sudden you realize, my gosh, what's going on here? You make a list of all of the most important people in the world. Well, let's narrow it to our world, in the United States. The presidents of the United States, the vice presidents, the senators, the congressmen, the members of the cabinet, the top military officers, the head of the CIA, the head of the FBI, the heads of the largest banks, the head of the networks, ABC, CBS, NBC, Turner, a network, a list of the owners and operators of the Washington Times, the New York Times, and all the Los Angeles Times, Time Magazine, Life Magazine, the presidents of the great universities, all the think tanks, the big tax-exempt foundations, the Carnegie Fund, the Rockefeller Fund, and so forth. And you make a list of those people, and it is absolutely amazing. Approximately 80% of those who control America through these channels are members of the Council on Foreign Relations. Now that means that the nation is in the hands, through these power centers, in the hands of people who have a mission. And that mission is to create a new world order based on the model of collectivism. Now, why did I go into all of that? The question is, what can we look for in the future in the way of opposition? These people, who, as you can imagine, are extremely powerful, are not going to like what we are trying to do. Because as small as we are, and as feeble as our little voice is right now, we've got our finger on the pulse of truth. And that truth is getting out. And it's getting out to more and more people. And sooner or later, we're going to come into the crosshairs of this group of people. They're going to say, well, what are we going to do about that? I know what they're going to do about it because I've seen them operate before. And it's not a pretty picture, really, but we have to know what lies ahead. I've watched these people in one form or another destroy their opposition rather methodically, and I've observed how they go about it. The first step is to demonize the leaders of these movements. And that's pretty easy to do when you dominate the media. All you have to do is convince the American newspaper readers and television watchers that the heads of these organizations are really bad people.
Or lunatics.
That's a bad person, isn't it? Yeah. Lunatics, child molesters, skirt chasers, drug addicts, money launderers, whatever. Terrorists, new word, of something. And unfortunately, most of the people will believe it because it's in the media.
Television
They'll believe it. What was this fellow's name? Koresh, who was with the I'm drawing a blank.
David Koresh?
David Koresh, yes, yes. In Waco.
The Branch Davidians?
Branch Davidians, thank you.
They were incinerated,
I don't have any defense for this guy. I don't know much about him.
Right.
But I recognize the tactics. When the military went in there and the government went in there and wiped those people out, in order to make it look like they had done a good thing, they called the media in and they demonized this guy in the minds of most Americans. They made him look like he was a child molester and a lunatic and hoarding weapons and all these things. So the average guy said, oh yeah, I'm sure glad they got rid of him and all those lunatic followers. That's what they do. This is the policy. They always demonize the people who are their opposition. I remember back in the early 80s, a very good friend of mine was a doctor, an MD in San Francisco, John Richardson. He had a good family practice there, and he had a lot of cancer patients. And he started to use a treatment for cancer which was unapproved by the government, okay? It was not on the approved list. And he knew that. He used it very cautiously, but he was saving lives at a much higher rate than anything that was produced by the pharmaceutical industry. And so the government came after him and said, you got to stop doing that. He said, I can't stop doing this. I'm saving lives. And it's my Hippocratic oath to save lives. And they threatened him, and the bottom line is they demonized him. They arrested him. They took away his license to practice. They destroyed him in the public mind. They accused him of drug smuggling. Can you imagine that? Here's the most respectable, principled guy you ever met. But he was using a substance in the treatment of cancer that was not approved. They couldn't show how it came into the country. They assumed it was smuggled in, and therefore he was involved in a conspiracy to smuggle drugs.
And they couldn't show how it was hurting someone either.
Well, they couldn't show that. That wasn't the point. They didn't try and prosecute him on the basis of hurting somebody.
That was helping.
They prosecuted him on the basis of being a drug smuggler, you see. And when they hauled him off and put him in the paddy wagon with the hands behind his back in handcuffs, of course, they made sure that all the cameramen were there from the newspaper and the television stations, and they saw this guy going into jail as a common criminal. And then when that was played on television that night, you know, his friends and his neighbors who liked him so much, they looked at that and they said, you know, oh, he seemed like such a nice person. Who would have guessed he was such a bad person like that? That's how they work. Sure. First, they demonize their opposition. Unfortunately, that's pretty easy to do under the present circumstances. If that doesn't work, and sometimes it doesn't, then the next step, I know what they do, is they try and buy them off. They give them business opportunities, investment opportunities. They give them a nice retirement fund. Give them a job. How would you like a job as the head of some organization?
Which was a popular practice of former President Bill Clinton.
Yes, of course.
As soon as you said that, I thought of that, and you know, with Carroll Quigley and his
yeah, of course. This is what's a few $100,000 a year to these people? It's nothing, and many people are tempted by that. So all they have to do is remain silent and just collect their money. They don't have to go to work, really. Just collect their money. They're bought off. Another way of doing it is that they may come to the organizations that are giving them a little bit of trouble, and they'll come in with someone posing as a friend. Say, you know, I really like what you folks are doing. I've got a little money and I'd like to help you out. Could you use an extra $1 million or maybe a $5 million donation to your cause? Well, now you're listening very carefully. Of course, I'll come in, let's talk about this. Cup of coffee? You know, let's talk. Well, this person seems genuine and they do have the money. And they said, well, I'd like to help you out. The only thing is, of course, I'd like to make sure that the money is spent wisely. I'd like to have somebody from my organization on your board of directors. Would that be all right? Well, who do you suggest? Well, this so-and-so they suggest is a respectable person. He, too, seems to be enthusiastic for your cause. You say, yes, $5 million, one member on the board. Oh, sure. Seems fair. Well, then another $5 million and another member on the board, and the first thing you know, the board of directors is stacked by people who have a hidden agenda. And somewhere down the line, 5, 6, 7 years down the line, all of a sudden the organization is taken over and used by these people for a purpose entirely opposite to what it was intended to be. I've seen that done. And of course, if that doesn't work, then they always fall back or can fall back to rough games. They'll see that somebody is suicided or something like that. This we can predict will happen to us. Now, what do we do with that knowledge? Do we shiver in our boots and say, oh boy, I guess we better not do this? Or do we stiffen our back and say, hey, you got to go sometime. Let's get on with the battle. I had an aunt that raised me. She was a wonderful lady. And she used to say, I've got the courage to fight. I'm too cowardly to surrender. Yeah. And I think about that a lot. If we don't win this battle for freedom, we and our children and our grandchildren are going to live in a hell of tyranny. I could not imagine putting my own personal safety ahead of that future for our kids. We've got to take the risk. And so instead of being fearful about it, I think we should anticipate this sort of thing is coming and work like crazy while we can, while the sun still shines and we still have the freedom to do what we can. Let's get on with the job and recruit. Let's add to our numbers. Let's build our strength. Let's get as far as we can so that when these big cannons are turned toward us, they'll have a much harder time in accomplishing what they're going to try to do.
Well, it parallels another struggle. Early Christians, for example, who had to get a controversial message out in that time period, and there were usually two two items. You had the individuals that managed to get in front of large masses of people and make some big changes, but the more larger number was the, average individuals working in small ways, multiplied. So perhaps, with people tuning in here at Free Market News, hearing all of your information, it's huge. It hits you like a tidal wave at first. Just how much can you grab and internalize and then act upon? I think that's where a starting point, your website, is going to come into play, freedomforceinternational.com. Getting the information first from your website, talking to people in general. If you have friends that are concerned about issues that you're talking about, tell them about the website. Get us together. The attacks are going to come in I think the first popular attack, oh, you're one of those conspiracy crazy people. Everything's a conspiracy. I mean,
well, that'll be the more gentle form of it. Yeah, that'll probably start that way. In fact, already you hear that a lot.
How do you handle that objection?
If somebody says I'm a conspiracy theorist,
or whatever you're talking about, they accuse you directly, or oh, you sound like, or that's that conspiracy stuff, isn't it? If they don't,
Well, it kind of depends on my mood, I guess.
All right.
It doesn't bother me because I know where they're coming from. It's they don't want to believe what I'm telling them, and so they'd like to just label me as some kind of a nut that is not worthy of consideration. But the fact of the matter is, conspiracy, defined properly, is merely the combination of two or more people trying to accomplish something which is either illegal or immoral, and they're trying to hide it from everyone else. And the fact of the matter is that the engine of history is driven by conspiracy. Just about every major event in history was brought about by a conspiracy.
Sure.
So where's this theory business? This is conspiracy fact of history. Sure. And do these people really believe that there are no conspiracies today? Of course. Every day in Washington, D.C., there must be 1,000 conspiracies going on.
Sure.
And people can accept a conspiracy in a corporation. They expect a conspiracy on the part of their neighbor trying to get a hole through their fence or something. But when it comes to government, they think, oh no, these are all pure, saintly people up there. They wouldn't do anything like that. And I have to laugh at them. Conspiracy is a fact of life. So I kind of categorize these people as conspiracy poo-pooists.
Okay.
They don't think that conspiracy exists. And
yeah, that's interesting.
I feel sorry for them.
Very interesting. Yeah, everything basically called a game plan, right?
Right.
A game plan can be called a conspiracy. Gee, we're going to do this. Yeah. My neighbor is going to figure out a way to conspire against me to walk his dogs on my lawn
or
when
something,
I'm not around, or something.
Yeah,
You can get away with it. That's a conspiracy.
Yeah,
sure.
the insurance company is conspiring against us so they don't have to pay the premiums. People accept all of that. But when it comes to their government, they think,
they wouldn't be there. Dare. That goes against the Constitution.
Well, those are all good people in there, you see. It's kind of a silly objection, but I understand where they're coming from. They're trying to protect their peace of mind because they realize that if what I'm saying is true, we have a big problem on our hands.
Yes.
And people don't want to accept that.
And therefore, if we have a big problem, what's the bottom line? What can the average free market thinker do right now?
Well, the average free market thinker, first of all, needs to get pretty clear on his knowledge as to what's going on. They can't just have a feeling about it. They've got to do a little research and then read a few books and listen to these programs, these excellent programs that you have that you're broadcasting. But then beyond that, they have to decide, what am I going to do about it? Well, those who want to actually do something about it and not just be a watcher of history, but be a maker of history, those are the ones that I'm interested in.
Right.
And that's why we created Freedom Force International. So if anybody has that drive that, by golly, I don't like this, I want to do something about it, the future of my children and my grandchildren is important to me, I'm not going to just sit here and watch it go down the drain, those are the people we invite to come over to our website at Freedom Force International.
Alrighty, and I mistakenly said freedomforceinternational.com. It is freedomforceinternational.org. And our guest, E. Edward Griffin, also author of The Creature from Jekyll Island. G. Edward Griffin, thank you very much for taking time to be with us.
Thank you, John. It's been a pleasure.
This has been a Free Market News ETV special presentation. Visit us online at freemarketnews.com.